With the rather lukewarm reception of patch 6.1, there really is a lot depending on the reception of patch 6.2. In this video, I'm going to go through 10 different features that I would like to see in the patch. This video is in no particular order, and without further ado, let's just get right into it. Number 10. First, let's talk about Timewalking, and I'm mentioning Timewalking because it's a feature that's been heavily hinted at, and it looks like it could be pretty damn cool. Essentially, this is the name applied to the idea of scaling old content up to your level. They've been able to do this, actually, since patch 5.4, probably since before that. However, they have had issues working out a good reward scheme to place within this, and it really is a tough nut to crack. They probably don't want to just go around and start throwing out bits of new and competitive gear from doing old-scaled dungeons, but at the same time, it's very important that there's reason enough to go back and do these old dungeons and raids on that harder, sort of relevant difficulty. On top of all that, could they realistically apply it to all content? Would it be so much that, say, group formation and queue times would be a problem? Would they have the rewards to spread across so many different dungeons and raids? And on the topic of rewards, and on top of that, what would they even reward us with? I mean, that old content already drops transmog gear, and it's very unlikely they're going to be giving out, like, top-end raid gear or anything like that from it. You probably get my point here. It's a really bloody hard one to work out. Now, they could actually even go a different direction and have, say, a weekly dungeon and raid quest that could involve, like, scaled up content specifically for that week with more traditional style rewards. Maybe some, they could do maybe, new unlockable transmog sets. That could be possible. Realistically though, they'd probably have to start off with one set per expansion per armor type. Going one per class would be amazing, but that would be a lot of artists' time. I'm not really sure exactly what they would do here, it's all up in the air, and the reason why I'm not diving into a superb amount of detail is because we pretty much already know this is coming out. Ian Hazzikostas, in a recent interview, actually it wasn't, it was a live Q&A on Twitch, he talked about this feature when somebody asked him, and he said to stay tuned for more updates in regards to it in the very near future. It was very much a case of wink wink nudge nudge, it's probably coming very soon, and it makes sense that it's going to come in patch 6.2 as far as I'm concerned, because the .2s are generally the major content patches. Number 9. Next, let's cover the idea of dungeons. So, Warlords of Draenor launched with a historically low number of dungeons. I believe it's only 8. And granted, they were very, very good dungeons, but there just weren't that many of them. In patch 5.2, we're going to be storming Tanan Jungle and taking the fight, presumably to the, shall we say, newly revamped Iron Horde. I'm trying to stay away from spoilers. The main raid is expected to be the Iron Citadel, which is the Warlords of Draenor equivalent to Hellfire Citadel from the Burning Crusade expansion. This does make it an excellent candidate for a few new dungeons, perhaps even harkening back to the old ones from the Burning Crusade. Now, the Iron Horde does appear to have been just quite a bit more industrious than the Horde in our timeline, so let's just assume that this Iron Citadel would be large enough to accommodate for multiple dungeons and, of course, the raid. That said, it is possible for some other dungeons to pop up if they really wanted to. Perhaps it could involve some of the Burning Legion stuff that's going on within the zone. Anyway, having new endgame dungeons with relevant rewards would do a really, really good job of providing new gameplay, especially if it was balanced such that they were heroic only and were decently challenging, far more challenging than the level 100 heroics, or at least a good bit more challenging. Certainly, I know that the 3 Icecrown Citadel dungeons did a really, really good job in that regard. On heroic difficulty, they were decently challenging, you had to pay attention to tactics, and it felt like a genuinely sort of challenging and rewarding experience for the most part. Of course, if you're in full raid gear, maybe less so, but for many of us, I think they worked very, very well. And also, it does provide another, perhaps more gameplay-intensive route for progression for your ults, which could be more interesting than, say, going through LFR and Garrison missions. It's also speculated, based on Blizzard's comments, that Warlords of Draenor will be a 2-raid tier-long expansion. This would make patch 6.2 the final raid tier of the expansion, which is a bit strange considering it only just came out in November, but I think that if this is to be the final raid tier where we tie up the Iron Horde story, it makes sense that that is where they put the new dungeons so that there's plenty of just content there and stuff to do in that big final raid patch to tide us into the future. Number 8. And next, I couldn't talk about dungeons without completely forgetting to talk about the idea of Mythic Dungeons. In the past, Blizzard said that one of the key issues with adding mid-expansion dungeons was that they sort of funnel the player base into just a few bits of content. Later on, one of the lead developers, I believe it was Ian Hazacostas, said that adding mythic difficulty and then applying it to all dungeons would essentially mitigate that problem, and I do like his idea. Assuming the next raid tier's normal mode gear is around item level 700, which would be on par with the eye level difference between, say, Throne of Thunder and Siege of Orgrimmar, I would have the new dungeons basically drop gear that's in between LFR and normal mode. I think that would work out quite well. Older dungeons on Mythic difficulty would perhaps drop LFR quality gear, so the new dungeons would be a bit more challenging with sort of better gear, but the older dungeons they'd still have a Mythic mode, it would just be maybe on par with LFR gear or something like that. And of course, Mythic would be balanced to be, I'd say, about as hard as the harder Cataclysm Heroics. Some of the Cataclysm Heroics on launch were still dead easy, but a few of them were a little bit more challenging, and I think that is roughly what you want to aim for. On top of this, they would, unlike, say, challenge modes, have full loot tables, and none of the enemies would scale, so it would be pretty much your traditional dungeoning experience where you do have power progression and things like that, and since, you know, the gear's better than LFR, and I think that just would befit the extra difficulty. Finally, I would have them on the looking for dungeon tool, but behind a gold proving ground. I think a mix of the good gear and a proving ground barrier would let people know that it is supposed to be decently challenging content. Number 7. Next, let's cover traditional style reputations. So reps have been very, very weak in this expansion, and patch 6.2 is of course a great time to tackle this problem. First of all, I think that we should have a traditional style of reputation. This is one with daily quests, perhaps some one-off story quests, and then rewards which are not heavily tied into player power. Call me old-fashioned, but I honestly think one of these would be completely fine. Remember, the daily quests themselves were not the problem in patch 5.0, the problem was that people perceived that they needed to do an insane number of dailies to be competitive. Throwing one or two of these into Warlords of Draenor wouldn't really hurt, especially if the main rewards were not related to player power. As far as specifics go, there's really a lot that you can do here, and much you can just contrive if you really want to. First, the Dracorium in Shadowmoon Valley could open up a rep based around getting a Fey Dragon mount, and the Horde could have a similar thing going on with, say, one of the Rylaks. Wait, sorry, no, that's on the Blizzard store, never mind. Maybe we could have a Ravager rep. No, that's in the store as well. Yeah, thanks, store. In terms of other things, though, there is supposed to be a smaller, band of Laughing Skull orcs who broke off and went to Farallon, and there's supposed to be a band of Draenei up there as well. If Farallon isn't to be in this expansion, then perhaps they could feature as some sort of reputation. Hell, a faction could even pop across from our reality in order to study the Burning Legion for when we have to face them in our own reality, or something like that. There are loads of possibilities here, even if it means contriving a bit, and of course, they could have a rep like this based outside of Tanan Jungle that they could just pop in as a bit of content. Throwing in one of these traditional style reps would not be the big focus, though, of this patch, and I do have other reputation-based ideas in this video, so stay tuned for them. Number 6. Next, let's talk about arenas and battlegrounds, and this is a very, very, very simple point. They quite simply just need to be added. It's been 2.5 years since we last got an arena, and nearly 2 years since we last got a battleground. I'd imagine that Ashran, by design though, is not the kind of thing that would really appeal to the more serious PvP players. For me, the appeal of PvP has been the battle of reactions and wit between two manageably small teams such that strategy can really be important, whereas Ashran strips all of that causality out and turns it into just being big globs of players. What I'm trying to get at here is that it doesn't seem like the core PvP community has really been catered to by bits of in-game content in quite a while. Perhaps the Trial of the Gladiator feature that was cut from Warlords of Draenor would have filled that void, but well, quite obviously it's not a thing, and it doesn't seem like all is that well in the PvP front. While tight class balance though is arguably more important to overall PvP enjoyment, I do think it's about time that a new BG and arena should be added. They've got so much cool art going on in the world of Draenor, it would be criminal not to use those excellent assets and create some sort of arena or battleground. It really would be. Number 5. And with that covered, let's chat about the Garrison campaign. So, the Garrison campaign will nearly definitely continue in patch 6.2. Hell, from a lore perspective, we'll need a hell of a good introduction in order to set up the lore behind the new raid and deal with some character-related stuff. Looking back at the 6.0 Garrison campaign, I think that they should be very careful not to pad it out with too much filler. Of the 16 or so quests, many felt extremely uninspired and random, both from a narrative perspective and a gameplay mechanic perspective. For the 6.2 outing, I think that they should have perhaps a more linear fashion of questing that's really focused around telling a single, consistent story, with no filler dud weeks that really just sort of waned me off the whole thing. Seriously though, everything I think should live up to the quality of, say, the Trial of the Exarchs quests, or the quests that were involved with the Burning Blade.
Trust in your people and trust in yourself. Now, rise!
If you look back at patch 5.1, I think that did an excellent job of telling a single cohesive story in a really effective manner. I suppose ideally I'd also make them a little bit more challenging, perhaps even including stuff like, say, similar to the Kairos fight from the legendary quest, but that would be unlikely because outside of raids, Blizzard does seem very averse to adding any form of difficult content into the game, which is kinda sad. Number 4. So let's hop back into the realm of reputations, and this rep is a zone-wide battlefield. This would be quite similar to the proposed redesign of the Shatari defense reputation that I did a while back on my channel. There's a link to that video in the description. Essentially what it would be doing is taking the ideas behind the patch 5.3 mechanics and then fully utilizing them. Patch 5.3 needed more meat to it, obviously, but fundamentally I do like the idea of there being these various war-related events going on. It's just sad that I don't think they've really been used to their fullest potential. This reputation would essentially be the next wave of reinforcements from our home factions, and that could work out quite well with the idea of it being a large battle. After storming the gates of Tanan Jungle, you would essentially set up a stronghold with this faction, and then have the rest of the reputation be focused on the actual war. You would perhaps have a weekly quest, maybe a few dailies, and then a dynamic series of events and world bosses that appear throughout the zone. Completing events would maybe give you a loot bag and some reputation, just, general handy rewards. There's specifics that can be worked out. They could also tie this new reputation into perhaps the new Garrison campaign of this patch and make it feel a little bit like patch 5.1 worked, so that instead of getting weekly Garrison campaign missions, you get Garrison campaign missions based on your actual participation. I think the combination of having the large story quests driven quite literally by your actions on the front lines would work quite well if they managed to nail it, which is of course granted quite a large if. Number 3. The next thing that I'd like is a robust Garrison Outpost in the Tanan Jungle zone. This would be, well, less of an outpost and more of a miniature garrison. There'd be some powerful zone-wide buffs or whatever associated with this as well, but more importantly you'd have things like, say, the mission table, and maybe even portals to our own garrison and the Ashran hubs. Maybe they could give you access to your work orders as well, so if you wanted to deposit work orders you could. Basically, this would just be somewhere different to hang out, and I think that would be really nice. I'm getting the feeling that our smaller garrisons have gotten older, perhaps a little bit faster than the likes of, say, Shattrath City and Dalaran. Number 2. Let's talk about world PvP. So, they should just nuke Ashran from orbit, take the pieces, try to sellotape them into something a little bit less awful, and call it a day. It wouldn't be that hard to cock up that badly, apparently. Okay, let's be a little bit less drastic and talk about constructive things. So, instead, let's think about adding some world PvP mechanics right into Tanan itself. Controlling them could give you benefits like, I don't know, a zone-wide buff, honor points, whatever. Hell, perhaps they could actually be a part of some PvP-specific daily quests, similar enough to how it was handled in patch 5.2. That stuff was kind of fun, but imagine if you were one of those players who decided to do PvP quests in the Tanan Jungle, that would send you off actually fighting other players trying to control for territory that is just in this large part of your zone. that stuff could work out really, really well. But of course, there is always the problem of faction balance, and for many servers, it does render a lot of world PvP content, well, very problematic, honestly. What they could do is try to design around it by having low represented factions, maybe spawn NPCs or various things like that, but those mechanics often come off as being messy and not really particularly fun for the people who are fighting against them. So granted, that part is actually very hard to work out quite well. Now, of course, it's worth remembering that in Warlords they did change how PvP tagging works, such that it's very, very hard to get into PvP combat if you don't want to be. Of course, if you're on a PvP realm, then that's what you signed up for and you're going to have to deal with it. I suppose something like this would almost harken back to the world PvP objectives that were going on in the original Burning Crusade expansion. Lore-wise, for Tanan, it's not a perfect fit, but then again, neither is Ashran, and gameplay mechanics generally do trump story. Number 1. As much as I personally am feeling the Garrison attrition, sure, some new features could work out. You could throw in a 4th level and combine that with a few new buildings, if you really wanted to. Though, I'm not sure if making Garrisons such a major feature of this patch would be a great idea. We've been in them so much in patch 6.0 and 6.1, that I think it's perhaps time to refocus on the content of the world itself, and that just might be a better direction for them to go in. Certainly though, one thing they should consider doing is making the Garrison a good bit more alt-friendly. I recently did a video on this topic, and you can again find a link to that in the description. But essentially, Garrisons can be quite a grind on alts, and things like, say, even a shared stash between all of your characters would go a long way to making them a good bit of fun. And then of course, as I said, yeah, 4th level, new buildings, whatever, but I'd argue that the resources that would go into crafting those would be better spent fleshing out the world and making the content of the Tanan jungle be as good as it possibly can be. Remember, this zone has been delayed from the release of Warlords of Draenor, so it better be damn good when it comes out because they have had a lot of time to work on it. Anyway, there you have it. That's pretty much the stuff that I'd like to see in patch 6.2. Of course, having all 10 things on this list would maybe be a little bit much, so, you know, pick and mix, see what you like, and hopefully, whatever happens, patch 6.2 will be a real cracker of a patch that will give this game the just kick in the balls that it sorta needs right now. Thank you very much for watching the video, and I'll see you next time.